Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into a nightmarish crossroads of history, where a king's glittering crown tumbles into the dirt, the air around you buzzing with the kind of silence that only follows a betrayal. The torches burn low, their flames licking the darkness in jerky fits, and somewhere in the distance, boots pound against cobblestones like a war drum gone off beat. You can almost smell the iron in the air, part blood, part the cold metal of shackles you're about to see fastened. You probably won't survive this if you keep standing so close, but hey, that's the fun of traveling through history, isn't it? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love knowing how our little time-traveling club is scattered across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The king's capture doesn't come with the grand trumpet fanfare you might expect. Instead, it arrives in a rush of half-heard orders, the glint of steel in the moonlight, and the rustle of silk robes trying to move too fast. You're standing in the corner of the great hall when the doors slam open, not the way servants push them, but the way soldiers do with the wood rattling in its frame. They pour in armor clinking like coins in a beggar's bowl. At their center is a man with no patience for ceremony, only the cold satisfaction of an order fulfilled. The king, still in his embroidered tunic, looks less like a ruler and more like someone trying to remember if they locked their own bedroom door. He doesn't fight. That's the first surprise. Historians still argue whether it was resignation or calculation that made him lift his hands without resistance. You notice the crown slip just slightly as they wrench his arms behind him. It tilts at a strange angle, catching the firelight for the briefest moment before a gauntleted hand removes it entirely. No ceremony, just an abrupt, almost casual theft of authority. It lands in the dust on the floor, rolling once before stopping against a boot. One soldier nudges it aside like it's just another piece of clutter. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some medieval courts, it was customary to confiscate a ruler's belt before removing their crown, as the belt symbolized the binding of power to the body. Here they skip straight to the headgear, which tells you something. This isn't tradition. This is insult. The courtiers, those silken shadows along the walls, react in a spectrum from wide-eyed terror to the kind of smug calm you only see when someone's gamble just paid off. You spot one advisor who had been singing the king's praises just yesterday, now tracing the rim of his wine cup like he's already moved on to the next ruler's favor. Betrayal isn't loud, it's quiet, deliberate, and best done when everyone is pretending not to watch. The king is pulled toward the doors, his slippers scraping the marble, and you're swept along in the current of soldiers. Outside, the night air hits you cool, but carrying the heavy scent of rain-soaked earth. Somewhere a dog barks, oblivious to the weight of history passing its doorstep. The moon slips behind a cloud, and for a heartbeat, everything is shadow. Then the torches flare brighter, and the reality of the moment hardens. You realize this isn't just an arrest. This is the first step in erasing a reign. His name will be spoken in whispers, his banners torn down before sunrise. But right now, in this moment, all you can hear is the steady rhythm of boots on stone and the occasional metallic jingle of chains. As the gates of the palace close behind you, you glance back once, catching sight of the empty throne room bathed in gold from the last embers of the torches. The crown is gone. The dust remains, and the silence feels like the kind that waits for a story to end. The throne room doesn't stay empty for long. By the time you slip back inside, the scent of the king's presence, warm wax-spiced wine, that faint whiff of cedar from his cloak, has already begun to thin. In its place comes the sour musk of too many bodies leaning in too close, their voices pitched just low enough to claim innocence if overheard. You linger near a pillar, watching the way the room rearranges itself now that the axis of power has tilted. Men and women who used to orbit the king like obedient moons are drifting toward new centers of gravity. A general with a chest full of medals suddenly finds himself surrounded by advisors who once treated him as little more than furniture. A lady-in-waiting keeps glancing at the main doors, as if expecting the new order to walk in wearing fresh robes and a bigger smile. One courtier, his rings so heavy they clink when he gestures, leans into a cluster of nobles. "It's for the good of the realm," he murmurs, and the others nod in perfect rhythm, as if rehearsed. You can almost hear the political gears grinding, already deciding who will inherit which estates, which titles, which burdens. And in the middle of it all is a long table still set, with the king's unfinished supper, roast quail, untouched figs, and a silver goblet that rocks slightly from some earlier disturbance. Here's your mainstream historical fact: in many medieval courts, the throne room was never truly private. Even at night, guards, scribes, and servants wandered through on errands, meaning every conversation, no matter how hushed, risked being overheard. That's why whisper chambers were built into some castles, small, acoustically perfect nooks, where secrets could be shared without risk. You watch one of these whispered conferences take shape now. A half-circle of robes, heads bowed together, lips barely moving. A name drifts toward you, one you recognize as belonging to the commander of the palace guard. Odd, since you saw that very man helping fasten the king's chains less than an hour ago. Historians still argue whether the guard was bribed, blackmailed, or simply loyal to a cause bigger than the crown. Then there's the fringe detail: in certain treacherous courts, allies used coded compliments as cover for plotting. A phrase like "your cloak is most finely woven" might really mean "it's safe to move tonight." You're fairly sure you just heard the modern equivalent. "Your wine is perfectly spiced," passed between two men who glance toward the east wing as they speak. The light in the room has changed since the king's departure. The fire in the great hearth burns lower, throwing shadows into sharp relief. The carved lions on the throne's armrests seem more like crouching predators, now their eyes catching the light in a way that feels almost aware. The golden canopy above the seat stirs slightly in the draft, and for an absurd moment, you imagine it sighing in relief, as if it too has been freed from a long, weary reign. One advisor steps forward to the throne, hesitates, then stops just shy of touching it. That's the thing about power: it's magnetic but dangerous. No one wants to be the first to sit where a condemned man once ruled, not while the air still holds the echo of his voice. A page boy shuffles past you with an armful of scrolls. His wide eyes dart from cluster to cluster, drinking in every shift of loyalty, every tightening of a smile. You wonder if he understands the value of what he's seeing, or if in a few decades he'll be the one pulling the strings. The murmurs swell, dip, then swell again. Someone laughs too loudly. It rings false like a cracked bell. At the far end of the room, the musicians kept here all evening, in case the king wanted entertainment, sit idle, plucking at their instruments without making a sound. Even they seemed to know music would be out of place. Then the doors open again, and the chamber stills. The captain of the guard enters, his face set in something between triumph and dread. He walks straight to the throne, not to sit, but to drape a heavy black cloth over it. The room exhales in unison. That single gesture says more than any proclamation. The king is gone, and this chapter is already being rewritten. And you, standing in the corner, realize something chilling. Every person in this room believes they're on the winning side. But history, as you'll find, has a wicked sense of humor about such confidence. The palace gates don't creak, they groan like old bones bending under the strain. You follow the king through the archway, your breath frosting in the chill night air. His hands are still bound, but the chains are short enough to force him into an awkward, almost stumbling gait. Around you, the world has shrunk to a small, moving island of torchlight, flickering against the wet cobblestones and the blank faces of soldiers. Beyond that pool of light lies a restless city. Word has traveled faster than the column of men. Shadows move in upper windows, and the occasional muttered exclamation slips from a half-open door before being quickly shut. Some people peer through shutters, eyes wide and hungry for a glimpse of fallen majesty. Others keep their heads down, pretending not to notice, because noticing means remembering, and remembering can be dangerous. The streets here are older than the palace, worn by centuries of cartwheels and bare feet. Somewhere under your own boots is the ghost of a Roman road, though the stones have been patched and replaced so many times that it's hard to tell where one era ends and another begins. That's your mainstream historical fact. In many medieval capitals, the main thoroughfares were layered over older empires' infrastructure, literally walking on history. The soldiers' boots clatter in uneven unison like a drumline that's lost its rhythm. You glance at the king's face, searching for fear, but instead find a strange calm. Historians still argue whether it was the calm of a man who believed rescue was coming, or the grim peace of someone resigned to the inevitable. As you pass under a narrow arch, the air changes. The city smells different here, less of damp stone and more of spices, tallow, and the faint smoke of cooking fires that refuse to be snuffed out just because history's on parade. This district, the old market quarter, is where the first embers of rumor often ignite. You can already hear its snippets of speculation tossed between doorways. They say he sold the port to foreign hands. No, it was murder. Not even his own guard was spared. Truth has become irrelevant. Tonight's currency is scandal. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some medieval cities, people believed seeing a condemned ruler on the street could transfer bad luck if you looked directly into his eyes. So instead of gawking openly, locals might watch him using polished metal plates or the reflection in water buckets. You spot two women doing exactly that, standing beside a rain barrel, pretending to fill a jug while stealing sideways glances. The torches cast wild shadows along the walls, making every signboard and carved lintel look like it's leaning closer to watch. Above, the moon has wriggled free from the clouds, again turning the puddles into little silver mirrors that catch the king's bowed head again and again like a repeated accusation. The route turns sharply, leading toward the lower quarter. Here the houses press in closer, leaning toward one another, like conspirators sharing a secret. Laundry lines sway overhead, casting net-like patterns across the street. A stray dog trots along beside the procession for a few steps before deciding the spectacle offers nothing edible. You notice one boy barefoot, no more than 12, dart from an alley to keep pace with the soldiers. He doesn't jeer like some of the older onlookers. Instead, He studies the king's face with something like awe. Maybe he's thinking of the coins that once bore that face, or maybe he's memorizing the moment to tell his grandchildren. History's witnesses don't always wear silk. The procession finally reaches the wide plaza at the city's center, where the cobblestones glisten with rain and spilled ale from the taverns. The soldiers slow their march, and the crowd, sensing the end of the journey, presses closer. Somewhere in the mass, a single voice calls out, not in anger, but in some strange mix of pity and warning. The words are swallowed by the clamor, but the king hears them. You see his head tilt slightly just for a moment before it drops again. And as you stand there, caught between the torchlight and the night beyond, you realize something. The march isn't just about moving the king from one place to another. It's about moving the city into alignment, showing every citizen exactly who holds the power now and exactly what happens when it's challenged. The Hall of Justice, or whatever polite name they've decided to give it tonight, glows with a strange, uneven light. It's not the noble illumination of a court in session, but the oily flicker of torches stuffed into iron brackets along damp stone walls. You step inside behind the line of guards, the king's chained hands swinging gently at his sides like pendulums counting down the minutes. Rows of benches sag under the weight of spectators who pretend they're here for justice, though you can tell most came for the theater. The air is heavy with wool cloaks and breath warmed by cheap wine. A narrow aisle cuts down the center toward a raised platform, where a long table waits under the scrutiny of the assembled judges. Their robes are fine enough to show status, but dark enough to blend in with shadow, perfect for men who wish to look important without being memorable. The king is placed on a wooden stool in the center of the floor. It's too low, forcing him to look up at his accusers, a detail not lost on you. Historians still argue whether these seating arrangements were intentional humiliations or simply the byproduct of limited furniture, but given the tension in the room, you suspect this is no accident. Here's your mainstream historical fact in many medieval treason trials. The verdict was decided before the accused even entered the chamber. The trial was a ritual, a performance meant to validate a decision already whispered into existence in private halls. You're watching exactly that now. The chief judge clears his throat, unrolling a parchment that stretches nearly to the floor. His voice echoes in the chamber, each word deliberate, as if savoring the way accusations taste in the air. He lists crimes like beads on a rosary, betrayal of allies, secret dealings with foreign powers, the mysterious death of a cousin who just happened to be next in line. None of these charges are supported by evidence presented tonight. They don't need to be. You catch a fringe detail in the proceedings. A scribe at the far end of the table occasionally dips his quill in red ink instead of black. This isn't decorative flair, it's a code marking the moments the court wishes to emphasize in the official record. Later readers will see the red passages first shaping their impression before they even absorb the rest. The king's turn to speak comes without fanfare. No one offers him a cushion or even a sip of water. His voice is steady but low, and you have to lean forward to catch the words. He denies the charges not with fiery outrage, but with the precision of someone carefully dismantling each claim. He names dates, places, and witnesses. He even calls out the contradictions in the judge's own statements. For a moment, you see something shift in the crowd. A few brows furrow. A few heads tilt. But the shift is fleeting. The chief judge taps the table, a quiet signal, and a second parchment is produced, signed testimonies from witnesses conveniently absent tonight. Their words are read aloud, dripping with rehearsed certainty. You can almost feel the narrative tightening around the king like a noose. The audience reacts in small, sharp bursts, gasps, murmurs, one outright hiss from the back. You notice the boy from the procession is here too, squeezed between two older men. His eyes haven't left the king's face, as if he's trying to memorize every flicker of expression for reasons he might not yet understand. When the final charge is read, the room holds its breath. The chief judge doesn't ask for a vote. He simply announces the verdict as though it's been carved into the stone beneath your feet since the dawn of time. Guilty. The word lands like a hammer blow, though no one flinches. A clerk stands to read the sentence, his voice trembling just enough to betray his discomfort. The punishment will be public. It will be slow. And it will be final. Somewhere behind you, someone chuckles. Not loudly, just enough to make your skin crawl. As the guards move to escort the king away, you glance at the judges. None of them meet his eyes. Power rarely looks its victim in the face at the moment of decision. They strip him of titles the way one peels paint from an old door, slowly, deliberately, until nothing of the original finish remains. The first to go is the royal sash, a strip of deep crimson silk embroidered with gold thread. A guard pulls it away without ceremony, folding it into a neat square before tucking it under his arm like a tavern towel. The king watches the motion with the detachment of someone observing a stranger's belongings being taken. Then comes the chain of office, a heavy collar of interlinked gold medallions. Once it would have gleamed against his chest in the torchlight. Now it's dull with the fingerprints of those eager to touch it on its way out. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Such regalia wasn't just symbolic. It was considered the physical embodiment of authority. In some cultures, losing it meant not only losing power, but severing one's divine right to rule. The soldiers don't stop there. They remove the signet ring from his finger slowly, as though savoring the moment, and replace it with a plain iron band, the sort worn by common prisoners. A crown could be stolen, but a ring like that, it was a public declaration. This man no longer commands. He obeys. The final indignity is the robe. Stripped of its ermine trim and weighty fabric, he's left in a coarse tunic that looks like it was pulled from the bottom of a laundress's basket. The crowd in the hall shifts uneasily, not out of sympathy, but because the transformation is unsettling. One moment you're looking at a ruler. The next, just a man whose authority has evaporated like breath in winter. And here's your quirky tidbit in certain medieval courts. A deposed ruler would be given a garment of shame, sometimes dyed in garish colors, other times patched with mismatched fabrics to ensure no one mistook him for nobility again. You half expect them to drag out something like that now, but the plain tunic is humiliating enough. The king remains still throughout, only adjusting his stance when the guards push at his shoulders. His calm is unnerving. Historians still argue whether this was stoic defiance or simply exhaustion setting in. At the far end of the hall, the herald steps forward with a scroll. The proclamation is read aloud, each title the king once held, now formally declared vacant and transferred to the stewardship of the council. You catch the careful language stewardship, not ownership, because even in triumph, they want to leave room for plausible deniability if things turn. A strange silence follows. No cheers, no applause. Just the sound of quills scratching as clerks record the moment for posterity. You realize this is the point where power doesn't just shift, it calcifies. Without his symbols, without his titles, the king is no longer a ruler in the eyes of anyone here. The guards take him by the arms and lead him toward the door. As they pass, you spot the boy again, this time standing near the back. His gaze meets the king's for the briefest second. It's not pity exactly, nor admiration, just a recognition that something irreversible has happened. The boy looks away first. The door closes behind them, with a sound like a lid sealing ajar. And just like that, the throne room returns to its new normal, the void where a monarch once stood, already filling with whispers of what comes next. They call it treason, but the word feels too small for the storm it's meant to contain. The parchment bearing the king's official crime list rests on a table in the council chamber, its edges curling from the heat of the fire. You're standing just far enough away to avoid being noticed, close enough to read the broad strokes. The story they've crafted is tangled but tidy secret meetings with foreign envoys, promises of land, in exchange for military support, and most damning, a suspected plot to overthrow the council itself. The phrases are heavy with alleged and reportedly a sign that hard evidence is in short supply. That's your mainstream historical fact. In many medieval justice systems, treason was often defined so loosely that it could be tailored to fit nearly any political inconvenience. But in this case, there's an extra layer. The document also cites a breach of sacred oath, claiming the king sought to dissolve certain religious privileges in favor of consolidating power. This is a dangerous accusation because it doesn't just anger politicians, it riles up the clergy and the common folk alike. You can already imagine the sermons, the king as a wolf in sheep's clothing, threatening the flock from within. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some kingdoms, accusing someone of sacrilege alongside treason doubled the severity of the punishment, not in the eyes of the law, but in the theater of public opinion. The logic was that you weren't just betraying a ruler or a realm, you were offending the divine order itself. Historians still argue whether the king actually held those secret meetings, or if the so-called witnesses were simply council informants, eager to prove their loyalty to the winning side. One scholar suggests the alleged treason might have been nothing more than a failed negotiation over grain tariffs that spiraled into paranoia. Another claims the foreign envoys in question never even entered the city. The king himself, confined to his cell, has yet to offer a public explanation beyond his courtroom denials. But word seeps in through guards with loose tongues. Some say he maintains that every decision he made was to protect the realm from famine and debt. Others insist he's admitted to nothing, speaking only in cryptic fragments about a greater threat that no one wished to see. You picture the network of events that could have led here: a slighted advisor feeding rumors into the right ears, a rival noble eager to test how far he could push the boundaries of loyalty, a council looking for a scapegoat to mask its own failings. One strand might have been enough to damage him. Together they've woven a net so tight, there's no room to breathe. Outside, the city is already choosing sides. Tavern chatter shifts like weather. Some voices calling him a traitor, others defending him as a man wrongly accused. And in the palace corridors, the whispers have already moved on, not to whether the king is guilty, but to who will wear the crown next. The council chamber empties slowly, its last occupants trailing the scent of spiced wine and victory. The parchment remains on the table, the ink drying into permanence. You know that no matter how the truth once stood, this version, the one in neat black script, will outlive every witness. The cell isn't much more than a hole in the palace's underbelly carved from stone, so old it's begun to sweat. The walls are damp to the touch, and the air has that mineral tang you get when water's been dripping somewhere unseen for decades. You duck your head as you step inside because the ceiling is low enough to make even a tall man stoop. The king sits on a wooden bench bolted to the wall. It's warped from years of use or neglect, and the straw mattress on top has been flattened into something more like a woven rug. His back is straight, though, as if sitting slouched might give the place permission to swallow him whole. The only light comes from a narrow slit high in the wall, moonlight pooling in a thin strip on the floor. Rats shuffle in the corners, bold enough to ignore you after a single glance. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many medieval castles, royal prisoners were kept in slightly better conditions than common criminals, if only to preserve their appearance should they be paraded before the public again. This apparently is the better version. Dinner is still in the corner, a bowl of something gray that might once have been stew and a heel of bread hard enough to make a decent weapon. The king hasn't touched it. Instead, his hands rest loosely in his lap, the iron manacles cold enough to frost the skin if you leave them still too long. He notices you and tilts his head slightly, like he's trying to decide whether you're another guard or some new kind of phantom. His eyes are calm, but you can see the fatigue at the edges like cracks in porcelain that will eventually give way. Historians still argue whether he ever broke down in these final nights. The official records claim he remained dignified to the end. Private letters from a palace maid suggest she once heard muffled sobs through the wall. Your quirky tidbit: some prisoners in this era believed that speaking certain protective verses aloud each night could weaken the blade of an executioner or tangle the ropes of a gallows. Whether out of superstition or habit, the king murmurs something under his breath, now the words too quiet to catch. The sounds of the palace are different down here. Above you can hear the occasional thud of boots, the creak of heavy doors, and once the faint notes of a harp drifting through the floorboards, music meant for someone else entirely. Somewhere deeper in the dungeon, a prisoner coughs, the sound swallowed by the walls. The king reaches for the bread at last, not to eat, but to break it in half, pressing the pieces flat against the bench. The motion is careful, methodical, like a man marking time when there's nothing else left to do. You realize that in this room the hours don't pass. They just pool around you until the next intrusion. When the guard finally appears, he brings a fresh torch and a reminder. Dawn comes quickly. The trial is over, the sentence decided, and the preparations, well, they're already underway. The king nods once, not in acknowledgement, but as if to say he's been expecting that line for a long time. As the door shuts again, and the light shrinks to a pinhole, you're left with the sound of water dripping steadily somewhere in the dark, counting down the seconds until the world above calls for him again. By the time the guards return, the dungeon feels even smaller than it did last night. It's not that the walls have shifted, it's the air. Thicker, heavier, as though the stone itself has started to lean in. You hear them before you see them, the scrape of keys against iron, the deliberate rhythm of boots on the steps. The torchlight comes first, sliding along the wall like a snake, then the men themselves, two in front, one behind. Their armor is mismatched, a mixture of polished steel and pieces so dented they've clearly been borrowed from the armory's forgotten shelf. Stan, the lead guard, says, "No title, not your majesty. Just the flat single syllable meant for any prisoner." The king rises slow, but without resistance. There's a faint stiffness in his movement now, The kind you get when your body has been sleeping on stone for too many nights. The manacles clink when he shifts, and one guard glances at them as if checking they're still there, not because the king might escape, but because losing a royal prisoner before the execution would mean losing his own head. The corridor outside the cell is colder than the dungeon. Moist air curls along the floor, creeping up from somewhere deeper underground. As you follow, your fingers brush the wall. It's slick, almost slimy, the stone worn smooth by generations of prisoners being herded the same way. You climb the first set of stairs. Each step is carved from single slabs, but the edges are crumbled and uneven, treacherous in the dim light. The guards take them slowly, not out of courtesy, but because no one wants to be the one who drags the king's broken body into the yard ahead of schedule. Here's your historical sidebar. In many medieval executions, condemned royalty were often spared public humiliation until the very last stage. They'd be kept out of sight, transported in covered carriages, or marched through lesser-used corridors of the castle. The idea was to control the story, to let the crowd see the moment of justice, not the grim shuffle toward it. The passage you're in now feels like such a route, narrow, unadorned, lined with rough beams that sweat pitch in the heat. You can smell smoke somewhere ahead, faint at first, but growing with each turn. They pass a door on the left. For half a second, you hear voices inside, a burst of low laughter, then silence when the guards step by. Kitchens, you think. The scent of roasting meat slips out before the latch closes, and for a moment you remember the king's untouched bowl from last night. Another turn and the light changes. It's brighter here, tinged with gold. There's a window ahead, tall and narrow, the kind built for archers. Through it you catch the first glimpse of morning pale sky, edges painted pink, the mist lifting off the courtyard below. The king pauses as they pass. It's the first time you've seen him hesitate. His gaze fixes on something outside, maybe the chapel roof, maybe the river beyond the walls. The guard behind him clears his throat. The king moves on without a word. Up another flight, the air shifts again, less damp, more metallic. You know what that means. Somewhere close, the tools have already been prepared. In the old days, these instruments would be cleaned in vinegar before each use, not out of mercy, but to keep them from rusting. You pass under a low arch, and now you're in a hallway lined with faded tapestries. Once they must have been bright with scenes of hunts and battles. Now the colors are drained, the fabric frayed in long threads like drying moss. This stretch of the walk is eerily quiet. No voices, no footsteps from other corridors. Just the steady march of the guards and the occasional creak of leather straps in their armor. It's almost peaceful if you don't think about where it ends. When they reach the final door, it's not a grand gate, but a squat, reinforced slab of oak bound with iron. A guard fumbles with the ring of keys, the clatter sharp in the silence. One last glance passes between the men. The hinges groan. The door opens. What waits beyond is not the scaffold, at least not yet, but a small chamber hung with heavy drapes to block the view from outside. A single chair sits in the middle, flanked by a priest on one side and a man with a ledger on the other. The king is guided inside. The door shuts behind you. The ledger opens. The pen scratches. The priest begins. The king does not walk alone. He is led through the streets by men whose armor does not shine, whose boots crush the filth of the gutter into the cobblestones. His wrists are bound in thick hemp rope, the fibers cutting red lines into skin already bruised from the weight of the shackles. Behind him comes the execution cart, not to carry him, but to carry what will be taken from him along the way. It rattles and creaks like an impatient witness, its wooden sides smeared with the history of others who have passed this road before him. The people press in from both sides, forming a human wall. Some spit as he passes their phlegm, striking the dust before his bare feet. Others clutch relics, scraps of parchment coins, even lengths of ribbon, hoping to stain them in the air of this day. And then there are those who say nothing at all, whose eyes follow him with something that might be pity, or might be the quiet relief that it is not them. The drums begin a low, deliberate thump, like the heart of something old and patient. It is not a rhythm to quicken the pace, but to remind everyone that this is inevitable, that the street leads only to one place. Windows open above, faces leaning out to glimpse the broken man who once held all their fates in his hands. His shoulders are squared as much as they can be under the weight of exhaustion. His mouth is set not in pride but in refusal to give them the collapse they want to see. Children run alongside, darting in and out of the legs of the soldiers, their laughter high and strange, as if this were some festival. The air smells of sweat iron and the faint sweetness of overripe fruit left too long in the sun. The cart follows steadily like a shadow that knows exactly when the sun will set. The square opens like a wound in the heart of the city. It is not wide, not grand, only large enough to hold the crowd and the scaffold. Yet it feels endless because every eye in it is fixed on him. The scaffold stands in the center, black wood, polished by rain and use. Its steps are worn into shallow curves as if generations of condemned feet have carved their fear into the grain. Above the beam waits a silent horizontal line against the sky, holding the noose like a single word yet to be spoken. The people press inward until the air itself feels heavy. The guards shove them back, but they always surge forward again, pulled by the gravity of what is about to happen. From the edges of the square, the buildings loom like watchful giants. Windows are crowded with faces, balconies bow under the weight of those craning for a better view. Even the pigeons have gathered along the eaves, their small black eyes unblinking. At the far end, the priests stand in a straight line, their robes stiff as armor. They do not chant, do not bless, only watch, as if their role is not to guide a soul, but to witness its unmaking. The king is led to the foot of the scaffold. The rope around his wrists is untied only so they can bind his hands behind his back again, this time with the precise knot that will hold him until the final drop. A man steps forward, the executioner. He wears no mask. His face is not cruel, only practiced, the face of one who knows that hesitation is the only sin in his trade. The drums stop. The silence is so complete it feels alive. The king lifts his eyes, scanning the crowd as though searching for a single face among the sea of strangers. If he finds it, no one can tell. He takes the first step up. The first step creaks under his weight. It is not the sound of wood, it is the sound of history shifting, of centuries grinding against one another. The second step feels steeper, though it is not. Every rise between him and the beam seems to pull at his lungs, squeezing the air out, until each breath is a negotiation. The scaffold smells of old rain, of iron nails, and something else, something sour and animal, that clings to the rope above. He forces himself not to look at it. He will look only when there is no other choice. Behind him, the guards follow in silence. They are close enough that he can hear the leather straps of their armor whisper against their tunics. To them, this is only a duty, a march up wooden steps they have climbed too many times before. The crowd parts in his vision, as if seen through water. Some faces blur into nothing. Others sharpen painfully. A woman clutching a child who cannot understand why the man on the scaffold wears a crown. An old man whose lips move soundlessly, as if speaking to ghosts. A boy, no older than 10, perched on a barrel, eyes wide with the intoxication of spectacle. Halfway up, the king's foot hesitates, not from fear, but from memory. He feels for a single breath the smooth marble of the palace stairs under his heel, the warm echo of banquets and court laughter. It vanishes as quickly as it came, replaced by the rough bite of timber. The executioner waits at the top, holding the rope as if it is a leash for something unseen. The knot sways gently, though there is no wind. 3 steps remain. The murmur of the crowd swells and then breaks into silence again, the way the sea falls still before a storm. His pulse beats in his throat. The final step meets him like the edge of the world. There is nowhere else to go but forward. The rope swings just enough to remind him it is alive. Not alive in the way a snake breathes, but in the way it waits patient, knowing its purpose will be fulfilled. The hemp is coarse strands, swollen from old rain and dried blood, and when he touches it, it bites back with 1,000 tiny teeth. The executioner says nothing. Words are useless here. Only hands matter, hands that tighten knots, hands that grip shoulders, hands that push. The world has narrowed to 3 things. The wood beneath his feet, the circle of rope in front of him, and the space between them, a space small enough to step across, but wide enough to swallow a lifetime. Somewhere below, someone coughs. Somewhere farther away, a church bell tolls the hour, though its voice sounds muffled as if wrapped in cloth. He wonders whether the bell rings for him or for the world that will exist without him. The crowd's silence is heavier than their noise. It presses against the scaffold, against the air, against his skin, making him feel both too large and too small at once. The noose dangles at his eye level now. The knot, blackened from years of use, stares back like an unblinking pupil. It smells of rope oil and iron, an oddly clean smell like something prepared for a ritual. He thinks of the crown they took from him. Its weight had been constant comforting, even when it ached his neck. This new crown will not sit upon his head, it will close around his throat, and there will be no ceremony when it falls. The executioner steps closer, shadow covering his own. One hand raises the rope, the other parts it just enough for the king's head to enter. The circle waits. The air shifts when the trapdoor gives. It isn't a fall, not at first, more like the world being yanked upward, leaving him behind. His stomach tries to stay where it was, but his body has already betrayed it, diving into the hollow beneath. The rope bites immediately. Not with teeth this time, but with the cold certainty of a hand that never lets go. The knot slams into the side of his neck, twisting his vision into spirals of black and white. Sound fractures. A single plank creaks somewhere far below. A gasp erupts from the crowd, sharp and collective. The bell, still tolling, stretches its voice into something unholy, like metal screaming. Light wavers. The edges of the sky blur as if melting into water, and faces become smears of pale and dark, their mouths opening and closing like fish caught in air. For a moment, too short for mercy, too long for relief, he feels the absence of weight, as though every burden he has carried, every crown, every lie, every oath, has been torn away and scattered to the wind. Then the rope catches fully. It jerks, his spine sends a flash through his skull, and the world narrows to the drumbeat inside his head, a beat that grows slower, slower, until even that music begins to fade. Somewhere, A child cries. A raven lifts from the gallows beam, and the wind carries both sounds upward, where neither the king nor his crown can follow. The crowd does not breathe at first. It is as if the hanging has stolen the air from every chest, and for a few heartbeats the square is nothing but a painting, all color, no sound. Then slowly, reality seeps back in. Boots shuffle. A man coughs. Somewhere a market bell rings far too cheerful for the scene it interrupts. The body sways gently, turning with the breeze like an unwilling compass needle, pointing to nowhere. The rope groans softly, each twist a whisper too low to be understood. Faces tilt upward, searching for something. Vindication, justice, closure. None of it arrives. Instead, there is only that hollow sound, the absence of a voice that once commanded armies. Some avert their eyes, not out of pity, but because the spectacle is over and they have no further use for him. Others keep staring, hoping the stillness will crack, that perhaps the condemned will twitch and give them a second performance. The executioner wipes his hands as if dusting off a chore rather than a life. He glances toward the magistrate, who nods once, a signal that the record will read justice served. Yet the silence lingers. It clings to the eaves of the houses, curls beneath the carts and stalls, refuses to leave the square. It settles into the bones of those who watched, a weight they will carry without knowing it. And above them all, the rope remains taut, a single line connecting heaven and earth, telling everyone who looks upon it that the story is not over, it has simply stopped speaking aloud. The body is taken down at dusk. Not with ceremony, there is no music, no words, but with the efficiency of men who have done this before. The rope is coiled, the beam wiped clean, as if erasing a chalk mark from a board. In the narrow lanes beyond the square, children run and shout, playing at gallows with sticks and scraps of twine. Their laughter is sharp, unaware that they are rehearsing history in miniature. Merchants speak of the day in half voices between customers, pausing to glance over shoulders, as if the dead man might return to collect his debt. Some claim he cursed the town with his final breath, though no one agrees on the words. Others say the noose twitched after he was still, not from wind, but from something unseen, something unwilling to let go. By night, the square smells faintly of rope and iron. Dogs sniff the cobbles where his feet had hung above. The magistrate's clerk lights a candle to finish the paperwork, scratching the name in careful ink. Executed crimes against the crown. No mention of who he was before, what he built, who he loved. Farther away in a house with shuttered windows, a woman sits at a table, her hands around a cup gone cold. She does not cry. She listens to the distant toll of the bell, counting each chime as if they were heartbeats that no longer belong to her. In the darkness, above the town, the moon is thin, a blade in the sky. It does not mourn. It does not bless. It simply watches, as it has for every hanging before, and as it will for every one to come. And so the day ends, not with the shouts of the crowd, but with the quiet understanding that tomorrow will remember nothing except that justice once again was made to look like truth.